Welcome back. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about a little girl who was targeted and attacked by her mother's new boyfriend over the course of a few weeks, eventually resulting in her death. This is the story of Koralynn Fister. Koralynn, or Cora for short, Marie Fister, was born on March 9, 2010, to her parents David Fister and Becky Hupel. Koralynn was a beautiful, bright, happy 2-year-old who brought a smile to the faces of everyone that she came in contact with. The little girl loved dinosaur chicken nuggets and was affectionately nicknamed Monkey because she loved to climb all over everything. Koralynn's parents, Becky and David, had met online in 2008, and shortly after, David moved from his hometown in Iowa to where Becky lived with her young daughter, Koralynn's older sister, in Centralia, Washington. Here, David would work at a Subway, while Becky stayed at home watching Koralynn and her sister. Around August of 2011, Koralynn's father would lose his job, and this affected his relationship with Becky. Then, come February of 2012, the couple decided it was best to go their separate ways. Following the separation, the parents agreed that David would have Koralynn every Wednesday and Thursday, and Becky would have her the rest of the week. This worked for a little while, but after only a few weeks, Becky would text David telling him that their daughter was sick. Then, she stopped answering his texts altogether. So after not hearing from Becky for a few weeks, in mid-April, David went to the home that they had once shared, on West Oakview Street, and he demanded to see his daughter. Becky told him no, he wasn't going to take Koralynn. However, the toddler who had been listening in then began to wail. So Becky caved and decided to let David take Koralynn for a short visit. However, this would end up being the last time the father would see his daughter alive. On May 24, 2012, around 12:30 p.m., Becky and her older daughter went out for a few hours, leaving Koralynn in the care of her new, live-in, unemployed boyfriend, James Reeder. In less than 3 hours after Becky and her older daughter had left the home, James was running across the street, carrying an unresponsive and unclothed Koralynn to the neighbor's home, banging on the door, asking them to call 911. James had then placed the little girl down on the neighbor's porch and began to perform CPR on her. After he asked the neighbor to call emergency services, James explained that Koralynn had been in the bathtub, and he had left the room just for a minute to grab a towel. But when he returned, she was lying face down in the water, unresponsive. Why James couldn't have just called the authorities from his own home, we don't know. But when authorities did arrive on the scene, shortly after 3 p.m., they almost immediately noticed that Koralynn's body exhibited injuries, recent and otherwise, that caused them concern. It did not look like she had just fallen inside the bathtub. Once little Koralynn was rushed to the hospital, she would be pronounced dead shortly thereafter. It was determined that she had died from a combination of drowning and blunt force trauma. She had 4 distinct areas of head trauma, as well as bruising, cuts, abrasions, and wounds all over her body, some in more advanced stages of healing than others. Among these injuries were palm-sized pieces of skin missing from her buttocks and skin missing from the tops and bottoms of her toes. It was also discovered that Koralynn had been raped, and authorities believed that it had been multiple times leading up to that day. When James Reeder was questioned by police, he would tell them that he had known Koralynn's mother, Becky, for years after they had met at a party, but it was just recently that they had reconnected via online dating. After they began talking on Plenty of Fish, he had moved in with her and her 2 children just days later. This was 10 weeks prior to Koralynn's death. Then, about a month prior, James told authorities that he and Becky had agreed to split up the parenting responsibilities in the home. He had been the one to suggest it, and Becky agreed. After that, when the mother would leave, James would insist that she took her older child with her. Therefore, James had significant time alone with Koralynn. James would tell police that on the day that Koralynn had died, he began giving her a bath shortly after her mother left the home. But the thing is, emergency services had not been called until 3:09 p.m. Becky was said to have left the house around 12:30 p.m., nearly 3 hours earlier. Additionally, Koralynn's core body temperature had been measured at only 85 degrees, well below the average of 98.6 degrees. So she had likely been dead for some time before James had rushed her out of the house to the neighbor's house looking for help. James would then go on to tell investigators that Koralynn had hit her head on the tub, which is different than what he had told neighbors, that he had just left the room for a minute and she had slipped under the water. He would end up being charged with homicide by abuse, as well as 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of first-degree child rape, and possession of methamphetamine, as police had found some of this substance in his dresser drawer when they searched the home. James was then held on a $5 million bond. Koralynn's mother, 30-year-old Becky Hupel, was also charged in relation to her daughter's death. She was facing a charge of second-degree criminal mistreatment. The judge would order that she have no contact with children after she was released on bond, except for the 2-hour, once-a-week visit that she had with her 4-year-old daughter, who had since been taken into Child Protective Custody's care. The thing is, Becky was said to have some obvious mental disabilities, and was also said to be a special needs student throughout her time in school. According to Becky herself, she knew 13-year-olds who were smarter than she was, and police would confirm that this was pretty close to the truth once they reviewed her medical records. She also told them that she suffered from chronic pain, panic attacks, OCD, and was partially deaf. When Becky had spoke with authorities, she told them that due to her disabilities, it made it difficult for her to manage her children at times. She also admitted that James was one of 3 boyfriends who had lived in the home over the last year. She had begun communicating with James after her previous live-in boyfriend, Joey Michaels, was arrested on an outstanding warrant out of Missouri. But Koralynn's father, David, had just moved out of the home 3 months prior to Koralynn's death. So how she had another live-in boyfriend in that small gap of time is beyond me. Anyways, Becky would tell police that her previous boyfriends, including Koralynn's father, hadn't helped her out around the home or with the children. But when James moved in, he cooked, cleaned, and even offered to help toilet train Koralynn. 1 month into their relationship, he had encouraged her to give him half the parenting responsibilities. She agreed, and she thought that the help that he was giving her around the home was great. It should also be noted that James had 2 biological children of his own, whom he did not have any contact with. Though he was more than willing to just go into Becky's home and begin taking care of her children right away. This man is a sicko. And even though it said that he normally only took care of Koralynn on his own, he was also clearly helping out, taking care of Becky's older daughter sometimes as well, which makes me wonder if he ever tried or did attack her. Another thing that Becky had told police was that after James had started taking on more parenting responsibilities, their sex life had declined. The mother had also begun to notice visible injuries on little Koralynn's body, including an abnormal bruise that was near the 2-year-old's vagina. When Becky asked James about this injury as well as others, he always had an excuse though. Either the dog had done it, Koralynn had done it by falling down, she'd hit her head against the wall, etc. Then when Becky suggested that they take her to the doctors, James just belittled Becky instead, telling her that she would just be wasting the doctor's time because kids always got cuts and bruises. According to Becky, she and James still had a good relationship though. That is, until she would make him mad. As their relationship had progressed, James would frequently become verbally abusive towards Becky and accuse her of cheating. Then he would demand to see her phone. James also told Becky that if she disrespected him in any way, he would have his friends come and take care of her. James's ex-girlfriends would tell similar stories, saying that he often took their cell phones as well. He additionally would accuse them of cheating, and in many of these relationships, it escalated to violence. But most of these women had never called police, and the few who had changed their stories once the authorities arrived. Now, both women who had previously had children with James Reeder would tell police that he had punched them in their pregnant bellies. One of these women told detectives that 4 days after she had given birth, James pinned her down, choked her, and raped her, tearing out the sutures that she had from the birth. Multiple friends of Becky would say that they had tried to warn her about James's violent past, but Becky had just brushed them off. But according to Becky, she was scared of James and his threats of violence. However, despite this fear, she continued to allow him to live in the house and take care of her daughter. Neighbors of the family would say that they often heard a child crying loudly. So loudly, in fact, that the levels of noise were disturbing. Though none of these neighbors ended up calling police to report it. And now many of them regret their lack of action. Koralynn's father, David, would end up coming to Becky's defense by saying that she was one of the best mothers he had ever known. He continued on by saying that following Koralynn's death, Becky had gone to where he was staying at his uncle's house and gave him a hug and told him that she was sorry close to 10 times. She was sorry for everything that had happened and that she had ever kept Koralynn from him. According to David, he didn't even know that Becky had a new boyfriend. He only knew that David had been at the home the day he went to pick up Koralynn, and David was an old friend of his. In April of 2013, Becky would plead guilty to her charge in connection to Koralynn's death, and she was sentenced to just 1 year and 1 day in jail. James would also plead guilty to his charges, accepting an Alford plea, meaning that he did not accept guilt, but acknowledged that he would likely be found guilty. This also means that he will not have to register as a sex offender if he's ever released. He was then sentenced to serve a minimum of 37.5 years in prison, so hopefully he never does get out. A candlelight vigil was held to remember sweet little Koralynn Fister in Washington Park shortly after her death, and her funeral was held privately on June 16, 2012. Thank you for listening to Koralynn's story today. There seem to be so many sick men who prey on desperate single mothers. And it's disgusting and horrifying that so many moms seem to fall for these men's schemes. Their schemes to get in bed with their young children. Now, I know that Becky was said to have some cognitive disabilities, but regardless, she still should have known better than to move 3 different men, including Koralynn's father, into the home that she shared with her 2 young children. That is just absolutely reckless. What do you think about this case? So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a case you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email at awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.